I'm Taka Sakaeda, executive chef and co-owner of Naminori in New York City. I'm here to show you how to make every variety of sushi, all featuring salmon. Traditionally, salmon was not used in sushi. It used to carry a lot of parasites, but thanks to modern refrigeration and aquaculture, it has become a staple in many Japanese restaurants. The word sushi translates to "it is sour," and this is referring to the vinegared rice. It does not need to be in a roll. It does not even need to have any raw fish. And with that, let's start by making the rice. Rice being the most important component to sushi, I really do suggest to invest in a rice cooker. This dry rice is a Japanese short grain rice called koshihikari. So the first steps to making perfect rice is to make sure the rice is washed properly. We'll rinse this several times and make sure that the water is running clear before we move on to the next step. So the ratios we have here today is 1 part rice to 1.1 part water. So now we just turn the rice cooker on. This should take about 40 minutes. We'll be putting the rice into the hangiri. This is a traditional rice mixing pot. This is made out of cypress. If you don't have these, you can just reuse a regular bowl and a spatula. Here we have sushi vinegar, which is rice vinegar mixed with salt and sugar. If you want to pour this as evenly as possible over the rice, and as gravity pulls the vinegar to the bottom, we're just going to flip this rice and simultaneously remove any of the large clumps. And then from here, I'm just going to make small piles and cut, we call kiri, is to cut the rice to make sure each and every grain is making contact with the vinegar. Nigiri basically means to grab, and nigiri zushi is translated to hand-pressed sushi. Nigiri zushi is when a round, oval-shaped mound of rice and a slice of fish come together as one. In front of me, I have here a piece of sushi-grade salmon. If you do purchase this at your local market, please make sure that it is sushi-grade to avoid any foodborne illness. So the first thing that we want to do here is to take the salmon and create saku. Saku refers to the rectangular piece of fish that we will then use to slice for sushi. I like to cut my sakus to about 4 centimeters. The other piece here that is not a nice, beautiful saku, we will use this other piece for other applications like rolls. In order to create a very tender piece of fish, we want to always be cutting against the grain of the sinew. Sinew is connective tissue that's connecting the muscle fibers together. And so we can see here sinew is running this way, and in order to cut against it, we will be cutting this way. My knife is here, it's cutting against this sinew line, but it's also cutting against this sinew line as well. You want to make sure that your knife is long enough so that we can cut it in one stroke versus sawing through the fish. So the first cut here, again, these pieces we'll be using for something else. The cutting technique is called sogi zukuri. And it's very important here that we turn the edge here. By turning the edge, we actually create a very nice, clean cut on the edge, but also we call yane, which is the roof, which is creates a little edge here so that it can catch the soy sauce. There's usually a touch of wasabi between the fish and the rice. So today I have a piece of fresh wasabi, and all I'm gonna do is grate this. A lot of the wasabi that you'll find in markets will be horseradish with food coloring. This is the real deal. Real wasabi has natural sweetness already in there, and the spiciness tends to be a little bit more mild versus your horseradish counterparts. What we have here is a bowl of tezu. Tezu is water mixed with a little bit of rice vinegar. This is here to moisten our hands so that the rice doesn't stick, but also the vinegar is there so that we don't dilute the flavor of the rice too much. And I'm gonna be grabbing the neta, the fish here, and making sure that where we created the yane is on the backside, and just placing it right here in the center of my 4 fingers. There's a few techniques to molding the sushi. The first one I'll be showing is hontegaishi. So right now with the rice, I'm just trying to grab the right amount of rice. This piece right now that I have is probably around 8 grams or so. And then just taking a dab of wasabi, putting it right in the center. Essentially, I'm trying to create a rectangle with this rice. And so first step here is to create an L here. And so the thumb and then these 3 fingers, the 4 fingers, are creating a wall here. And I'm gently pressing down the rice into the fish so that the rice adheres to the fish. And I'm gonna do this and go backwards. Now I have the rice that's not formed yet on the other side. And then I'm gonna repeat the process where the thumb is here, the fingers are here, and I'm gonna be gently pressing. So really just trying to create this kind of rectangular shape in my hand. And so once we create the rectangle here, then we want to turn this fish over. And now it's really about bringing the fish and the rice together as one. And so we're gently pressing here. And as we press here, the rice has a tendency to come up. And so we're just gently bringing that tip down. And then we're going to repeat the process on the other side. And then at the end, we call nigiri zushi. This is very important, where we're actually just gently going to grab the fish and the rice. The last molding technique that we'll be doing is tategaishi. Generally, this technique is used for fish or shellfish that's very smooth or slippery. So we start off the same way here. The major difference here is now we're gonna flip this way and then reposition here. And the reason why is for fish that are very smooth and slippery, sometimes turning it this way, the rice and that whatever that neta is will fall off. And so in order to avoid that from happening, we're placing it here and then repositioning in your hands. This is tategaishi, but finished the same way. Before serving to the guests, I like to brush a little bit of soy sauce on the top. And there you have it, nigiri sushi. Hakozushi directly translates to box sushi. This is also sometimes known as oshizushi, which means to pressed sushi. This was first originated in Osaka, Japan. Hakozushi is an homage to the style of sushi that existed before Edomae sushi. Previously, they used to take salted rice, put fish inside of the salted rice, and press it firmly in a box to increase the fermentation rate. So what we have here is something that's called oshibako. This one in particular is made out of a cypress wood. We do want to soak this in water for a little bit just so that the surface is not as sticky. I've also used a piece of sasa here, bamboo leaf, in order to line the bottom of it so that we can prevent some more sticking as well. First thing we're going to do is to prepare the fish. I'm using the cover of the oshibako to measure the size of the fish. Obviously, if it's larger than this, feel free to cut off any of the ends. And conversely, if it is too small, you can go ahead and use multiple pieces to fill the top of the box. So I'm trying to get a very even slice here. And so cutting off the top that's a little bit rounded. And then we'll just be taking this slice and putting it onto essentially the bottom of the box. And so you can see here that the width is not exactly filling. And so again, we can go ahead and use other pieces and just to fill the empty spaces. Any piece that ends up being an offcut, we will utilize these in our other rolls. And so for the rice here, I will be adding some sesame seeds and mixing that in well. I'm gonna be adding a layer of the takwan here. This is diced radish, the pickled radish. And on top of that, I'll be adding this rice. This is a great place to be creative. You can add any kind of ingredients, any other vegetables that you want. So the next layer here, I'll be adding a little bit of color. So I'll be adding some shiso leaves. So shiso is a type of herb. Flavor is closely related to mint, and it does have a very herbaceous quality, just like cilantro. Now I'm gonna repeat the same layer that we did before, which is the takwan, and then finish it with the rice. And really where we're looking for is when it's loosely packed, it should come up to almost the top. I just want to make sure that the top of this has a slight moisture so that the rice doesn't stick. And so the next step here is to put the top on, and we're going to give this a very firm and even press. You can put, a good amount of your weight on this. And so you can see that it has gone down significantly. And so the next step here is to slice it. And conveniently, this design of this box comes with slits. And so we'll just be following those slits. And again, using a moist towel to wet the knife, and we'll just be going down each layer and cutting this all the way through to the bottom. So the next step is to push the hakozushi out of the box. So we'll just be putting the cover gently back on, just so that we can get a little bit of leverage to push this off. Take this, just flip the whole thing. And so since we put the sasa leaf here, the bamboo leaf, the top should come off nice and easily. And we can go ahead and discard the sasa. I'm gonna top this off with katsuobushi, which is a smoked, dried and fermented bonito fish, which has then been shaved very thinly. Just run along the top center. This is the aonori. This is another type of dried seaweed. This is also another flavor and also nice color, green color on the top. So here we have it, salmon hakozushi. It's been a long time since I had hakozushi. Very good. Hoso means thin, so it translates to thin roll. This roll usually only has one filling. The piece of salmon I have here is the edge piece from one of the saku that we made earlier. And so from here, all we're just gonna look to do is to create a strip, just what would fit generally in a roll. This is called a Makisu. This is made out of bamboo, and it's tied together with strings. Essentially, this is designed to aid in the rolling process. Nori. So this is a type of seaweed. There is a shiny side and a rough side. And so for this particular roll, we want to make sure that the shiny side is on the outside, which is a little bit more presentable. We're going to lay the nori right in the center of our makisu, and we're going to put the rice on the nori. And leave a few areas here with no rice at all. One thing to help in the rolling process, I'm making a little bit of a ledge here on the edge, I do like to put a little wasabi inside the rolls. And so we take wasabi and gently glide it across in the center of the rice here. And then we want to place the protein against the ledge that we made here. That'll help the protein not to slide around as we're rolling. We want to bring the nori all the way down to the bottom edge of the makisu. And then we're just gonna bring it all the way over, and we wanna attach that bottom portion where there's no rice to that portion of the front where there's a ledge. And essentially we're trying to create a square here. And we're using our index finger on the top to form the last 3 sides of the square. And you'll see here on the edge here that there's a little bit of a flap left over. And all we're gonna do is just roll that square over to cover that flap. Once we flip it over the edge, we're gonna reshape it to a square. And so first we're gonna cut this into half. And then we're gonna combine the 2 pieces, cut the halves into thirds. It's important to keep your knife with a little bit of moisture. It'll help your knife glide through the rice. So between each cut, I like to wipe off any of the excess rice that's sticking, and then move on to the next piece. So here we have Futomaki. Tamaki directly translates to hand roll. We'll be doing 3 different types of tamaki here, 3 different styles. One will be a cylindrical shape, one will be a cone shaped, and one is more of like a open shaped taco. So first I like to start with the cylindrical hand roll. So again, the nori here, we're gonna be working lengthwise left and right. We wanna just grab a small amount of rice here, just to cover the first section. And here we're gonna add a little bit of wasabi here too. And so for this cylindrical type, I'm gonna be using the strips here and just putting in as much of the ingredients as I want. Then from here, I will be just rolling this as like a cigar. And that is your cylindrical style tamaki. And so the next one I like to show is the cone shaped. In order to create the cone shape, we'll be putting the rice kind of at a diagonal. And again, placing the wasabi here. So I'm gonna use the cubed salmon here so it's easier to eat. And then we're just gonna take this corner here and bring it to the other side of the nori. And from there, we're just gonna roll this and wrap this up. And this is your cone-shaped tamaki. The last tamaki I like to make for you is the taco-shaped. This is the tamaki that we feature at Naminori. We're just gonna create a little bit of a oval-shaped piece of rice here. And we're gonna take the wasabi and place it on top. And for this one, we're gonna do a salmon, ikura, and cucumber. So I'm gonna start with the cubed cucumber julienne, then gonna place the cubed salmon on top. And on top of that, I'm just gonna put a little bit of the ikura, the salmon roe. So we take this, place it right into the center of the nori, and we're gonna wrap it up like this. And this is the U-shaped tamaki. In other words, maybe a sushi taco. The salmon roe really adds some salinity and umami to this tamaki. Shirashi is a Japanese word to scatter. And originally this dish was created in order to utilize some of the offcuts. In Japanese, we have a saying called mottainai, and really translates to what a waste. This philosophy is to utilize everything that we can. So the salmon I have here is an offcut from when we were producing the hakozushi. And so for this particular chirashi that I'll be making today, I'm gonna turn all these into cubes. So just making batons first and then cutting it the lengthwise in order to make cubes. To start the dish, we will create a base of sushi rice. So how much rice you start with is a personal preference, but it should be balanced with the amount of fish that you plan to put on top. This is called kinshi tamago. This is basically an egg omelet. And so what's in the mix here is eggs that are scrambled, seasoning of salt or soy sauce, and we add a little bit of starch to make sure that there's no residual moisture left over. So next I like to put on the salmon. So this chirashimai reminds you of poke bowl. But the differences here are in a poke bowl, the fish is marinated in a particular sauce, while chirashi is unmarinated fish scattered on top of sushi rice. Next we'll be adding the avocados. And so next I'll be adding the ikura, the salt-cured salmon roe. And I'll be putting this in small little dollops throughout the dish. Trying to keep things equidistant from each other. Random, but not random. Next I'll be adding the shichimi togarashi. This is a 7-spice blend. I like to put these into small pockets. The most common ingredients for the 7-spice blend is obviously chili peppers, sesame seeds, aonori, which is a type of seaweed, and sometimes orange zest, yuzu zest, and many other ingredients. And so next I'm gonna finish with these cubed shiso leaves. The last element I'd like to add to the dish is the square nori pieces. Nori to me adds like earthiness to all the dishes, and also has great ocean flavor. Also has umami and some salinity to it as well. And so here we have the salmon and ikura chirashi. This is a great dish with different textures and different flavors, and it really comes together all in the mouth. You have the salinity from the ikura, the umami, and the salmon is luscious and soft, really complementing with the avocados. Normally you might see this with 7 different types of fish and other vegetables and other ingredients. So really do not be afraid to get creative and have fun with it. Futomaki directly translates to fat roll. Futomaki generally always has multiple ingredients. A seaweed will be on the outside of this roll, so we want to showcase the shiny side again. And for the futomaki, we'll be flipping it so that the length is longer up and down. We'll be grabbing the amount of rice to make 1 layer on the nori. And similar to the hosomaki, we will be leaving gaps on the top and the bottom of the roll. And so gently, we just want to pull all this rice down. And important here is to make sure that the edges are filled. So it looks something like that. We'll be putting in a little bit of wasabi into the center of a roll again. And then we'll be starting with the shiso leaf. And then working with our proteins, I'm gonna put some in the front and putting some in the back here. Generally for futomaki, it is so large that it's hard to eat in one bite. And so if I'm using one main protein ingredient, I like to split it up between so that you can have the protein in every bite. And then the rest of the vegetables I'll be including into the center here. So I have takwan, and then we have our cucumbers. Just so the edge remains nice and clean, I'm gonna cut this in half first, and using the cut edge, putting that on the outside, and I'll fill the center with some more loose julienne. And the last ingredient I'll be adding here is the avocado. Futomaki generally has multiple ingredients. This is one of the most common sushi that is made at home, sometimes during the holidays, or even some special bento that kids might take to school. And now we're gonna roll this all up. And again, we wanna make sure that the bottom edge here is all the way to the bottom of the makisu. And using our hands, we wanna kind of make sure that the ingredients don't fly out forward. Just gently, we're gonna bring the edge of the nori to the front of the rice. And it's important here that once we get here that there is a little bit of residual rice left over. That's really gonna help us to seal the seaweed and close the roll. And so once we get here, we wanna gently roll past so that now it is closed. Use the makisu now to reshape and make sure that it's nice and cylindrical and just tucking in the edges. So again, we want to make sure our blade has a little bit of moisture. So we're going to cut this roll into 5 pieces. So starting with the first one here. And then after you've cut the first one, if you want, you can cut this into half and then cut these into halves as well. And so this is our salmon futomaki. Futomaki being so large, it is very difficult to eat in one bite, but not impossible. Uramaki means inside out. So now, instead of the seaweed being on the outside, the rice will be on the outside. The direction in which we use the nori is a little bit less important. Whichever side you grab it first, I think is fine. Again, we'll be grabbing the amount of rice to cover the nori with 1 layer of rice. So we'll start in the center here and pull towards the ends, making sure all the edges are covered except for the very bottom edge. And so now once we've covered the nori with rice, we're gonna flip this over. And now we're gonna fill it with our ingredients. So first we're gonna start with our protein. For this variety, we'll be filling it with spicy salmon. We have a little spicy mayo prepared. So some spicy salmon is chopped up and mixed with the sauce. I like to have my ingredients as whole as possible, and so I prefer to make it this way. And so once all of our ingredients are inside, now we're gonna roll. And so just gonna slightly dampen our hands here, and we're gonna pull from the bottom of the sheet. Once we get here, we just wanna tuck it in as tightly as we can. You don't need to over tighten. And then all we need to do is roll it over the edge. So now this makisu is now covered with plastic wrap. This will help the rice not stick to the makisu. And now we're gonna just use this to reshape and make it cylindrical. And so we're just gonna cover the top of it. And again, gently squeeze. And we're just gonna make sure that the edges are nice and tucked in. Top this off with shichimi togarashi. And so generally for this uramaki, we do cut this into 8 pieces, wiping the knife down to make sure that it's clean and there's a little bit of moisture. And so for this, just cut this in half and then bring it together. Cut these in half until we have 8 pieces. So half here, half again, and half one more time. So to plate, I have a plate here lined with a piece of sasa leaf, which is a bamboo leaf. And there you have uramaki with spicy salmon. Ikura is salt-cured salmon roe, and gunkan meaning battleship, referring to the shape of the sushi. Again, we're gonna be using the tezu to moisten our hands. So we're gonna grab a little bit more rice than we did for the nigiri sushi, and we will be using the same techniques to form the rice. And we have the thumb here on the top, and our other fingers here forming the L shaped here, and doing this flip. And again, L shaped on the other side, and then reverting back, and finalizing the rectangle. So here we're gonna add a little bit of wasabi here, And so I have a few strips of nori here for this gunkan maki. And so for here, we're just gonna wrap this around the rice. And we're just gonna fill this with our ingredient. This is ikura. I'm just looking at the shape of the gunkan, and I just want it to have a nice curvature over the top. The roe straight from the salmon has very little flavor. And in order to kind of elevate the natural flavor, there's two ways in which it is processed. One is to salt cure it, and the other is to marinate it in soy sauce. So the one we have here is a salt cured salmon roe. Sashimi is just sliced raw fish. Again, the distinction of sushi has to involve the vinegared rice, and here there's no vinegar rice, so this is not considered sushi. It has become a staple in every sushi restaurant to offer sashimi, and so that is why we wanted to showcase this today. I'd like to showcase two types of cutting techniques. One is sogi zukuri and the other hiki zukuri. Sogi zukuri is the same technique that we showcased in our nigiri demonstration. Again, we'd like to cut against the sinew line as we did before. And we want to start at the heel of our knife so that we have as much surface area to cut as possible and follow through all the way down. And so the difference here is that for when we cut for the nigiri, we made a yane, which was turning the corner. But in this case, we're just gonna go all the way straight down. And now to demonstrate the hikizukuri, this technique is predominantly used on fish that have a little bit looser meat that easily breaks apart from the sinew. And so we're starting all the way at the heel of the knife. And we're gonna slightly angle the knife away from our hands. So there's two reasons for that. And one of them is to make sure that we're not cutting our fingers. The other reason is to create a little live edge here. And I'll show you after I make the slices here. And so the idea here is to go into one stroke, cut, and then place the fish how it's gonna be plated. And so that there's very minimal movement of the fish. And when I say live edge, by creating that angle, this edge is now protruding versus looking like one block. And so that slight angle is going to create this separation. And so next I'll be plating the sashimi. And in doing so, we like to use something called tsuma. This is basically daikon radish and shiso that's been very thinly cut. So we'll just go center plate here, a piece of shiso. This is salmon sashimi. Making sushi is an art that takes years to perfect. Now that you've got a glimpse into the different varieties of sushi, you can get started at home today. Get yourself a rice cooker and start practicing. And maybe in 10 years, you could be making this video.